Welcome to Revenue Rehab, your one-stop destination for collective solutions to the biggest challenges faced by marketing leaders today. Now head on over to the couch, make yourself comfortable, and get ready to change the way you approach revenue. Leading your recovery is modern marketer, author, speaker, and chief operating officer at Tegrita, Brandi Starr.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Revenue Rehab. I'm your host, Brandi Starr, and as always, we have another amazing episode for you today. I am joined by Helen Baptiste, a COO at Path Factory and a member of the executive team. Helen leads sales, marketing, partnerships, and customer experience, and is responsible for all revenue and customer satisfaction. She is also the executive sponsor of the DE&I committee. Helen started her career as a secretary and has led numerous go-to-market team positions, including marketing, customer success, and business development, allowing her to bring an end-to-end view of the customer journey to playbooks she has developed and deployed. Helen, welcome to Revenue Rehab. Your session begins now.
Hi, Brandi. Nice to see you again.
Yes, I am so excited to talk to you. But before we jump all into that, I like to break the ice with a little woo-saw moment that I call buzzword banishment. So tell me, what buzzword would you like to get rid of forever?
So you know that Path Factory is a content experience and intelligence platform. And we talk a lot about long form content and how to break that up into bite-sized pieces. And my buzzword banishment word is snackable. I know some marketers love that terminology, but I think, breaking it into snacks is good, but making it snackable, it just kind of puts the hair on the back of my neck up a little bit.
I was going to say, yeah, that one is one that is overused. Everything is, how do we make it snackable? How do we make it snackable?
Yeah, and I feel like it's almost like you're entertaining for a 5-year-old, right? Like, he needs a snack now. Hurry, feed him. Anyway, sorry.
As I'm saying, as someone with a 7-year-old snack king, I can tell you that pretty much everything is snackable because he will have a whole meal and call it a snack and still look for another meal.
And a whole meal is a snack for a 23-year-old that I have. So it's all relative to what you deal with every day.
So we're going to take snackable and we're going to put it in the box
Okay.
and we won't talk about any kind of snackable content, at least until the end of this session. So now that we've got that off our chest, I have to tell our listeners I've known and admired Helen for quite a while and have been so impressed by the work that you do at Path Factory and just how you have really taken over revenue. And so today we are it's so rare, I always have the book behind me, or I guess it's on this side, but it's so rare I ever talk about the book. But for anybody who hasn't gotten it, CMO to CRO, the revenue takeover for the next generation executive, and chapter 15 is actually called Introducing the Chief Revenue Officer. And we talk about the CRO as being the title that owns revenue. In your case, you are the COO. And really, it's less about the title. We could make up anything. It is more about the importance and benefits of having revenue all under one leader. And so my first question for you is, because it's so rare that we actually see that, is how did your role come to be that you actually own all of revenue?
Yeah. So, I happen to be with the same CEO. This is our third ride together, third company together, fourth, three exits, fourth ride with investors. And the way it came about is that I was doing some professional services when he first walked into the company that he came in to take over from a founder. And it's standing up a product in its own right to grow the arrows in the quiver, if you will, of the company I was at. And that really is about understanding the entire customer life cycle, from prospect through to what you're going to deliver, to what the experience should be in that, and building the business model against it. And so when that company exited, he asked me to come and work for him again at another small startup out in Chicago called Item Master, which was the original founders of Peapod grocery, online grocery delivery. And they were the people that were providing content for CPG to, Giant and Peapod and Walmart and Amazon. And it was a very small company. And so having heads of sales and marketing and customer experience didn't really make sense at that time. And because I'd had that experience of running a piece of business, they were Series A funded, and I think they were less than $4 million in revenue at that time. It didn't make sense to hire those heads, right? And I think the other part of it is that my background has been, I started as a secretary, but I worked my way up with mostly customer-facing roles at an agency. I became a customer in some cases. And so, the idea that I'm looking at it from a customer lens every single time, whether that's a marketing effort or whether that's a solutions architect pre-sales experience. And then how do we minimize the friction throughout the life cycle internally so that the customer doesn't have to repeat themselves? Nothing worse than a salesperson doing a great job selling a piece of software. And then the CX team or the implementation team takes it over. And the first question is, so why did you buy us? Like that just doesn't make sense. So for me, revenue is about reducing the friction in the buying cycle and in the buyer management after the buyer has bought. And I saw something really interesting the other day that I thought was interesting, and I think it's applicable for kind of the role that I have when I see marketing, sales, and customer experience in my role. Is acquisition of new customers is about changing the status quo. Right, in terms of what they're doing. And that requires a different mindset. But on the defense of retaining customers, it's also about maintaining the status quo. So you have to be able to look at it from both sides, from the customer's perspective, and have the stories and the messaging and the positioning and the motions and the playbooks behind that that are all data driven and or contiguous in your CRM workflows. So revenue operations is my first hire I would make if I was going to be the head of all three positions. That's kind of the one takeaway that I want people to think about, is that person is maniacally focused on optimizing workflows and data and insights for the customer experience, not for the people doing the job. And so that's a mind shift. Most people are worried about what's the dashboard and, not what's the handoff from one team to another. And I talk about swim lanes and the relay race amongst my team very often, in terms of stay in your swim lane, but make sure you do a nice relay handoff back to the next person that's taking on the job for you.
Yeah, and it's interesting. In the last episode 22, I was talking to Ed Frame, and we were talking about that post-sale journey and how important it is to get that right. And one of the things that, he stressed in that episode was the handoff, especially when that initial sale is made. So I definitely agree there. And I do think that the biggest benefit is that frictionless experience. And I definitely give a big woot woot for a RevOps hire being the first, because, one of the things that when we first put the book out and, we started getting people giving us opinions on, whether they agreed or disagreed, they were like, well, why does your plan start with the technology? Why don't you just start by, putting in this leader that you want to have? And for us, number one, it was, path of least resistance, because so many people can't fathom putting all these departments under one head. But it really is the technology that is driving the customer experience. And when those technologies don't work well together, they create friction. And the example I always use is calling into the cable company, because everybody has experienced that, where, you type in your account number and push all these buttons, and then same thing, person gets on the phone and they're like, what's your account number? What was the point of me typing it in? And, all of that before. So what do you feel has been the biggest success in having all of the departments under one?
So look, I'm going to put it in the spirit of the economy right now too. And I know people are being asked to compress budgets, particularly from the marketing side, or getting rid of headcount in sales or BDRs or whatever it is. And we see that all over the news now. But for me, it's about making sure that we have a balanced experience across, right? And that resources are finite. Whether it's one department or three departments, that I have actually 5 or 6 departments. But I'm allowed to play the shell game a little bit differently, in terms of where is the money coming from, to make those decisions. So, for example, I would sacrifice a future hire to protect a marketing budget, as opposed to having a CMO having to defend that budget by themselves, or a salesperson making that decision in the silo. And so I can also have this transparent conversation across the organization about more collaboration and better alignment as well. And I think that the other part is, for me, is, board meetings are the bane of most people's existence, in terms of the prep. The benefit is that I can weave the cohesive story throughout the experience, and the plays and improvements that I want to make, holistically, and not in my own silo, without consideration of what other people might be thinking or planning. So I have a lot of self-discovery questions with me, myself, and I. One is sales, one is marketing, one is the CX side. But the opportunity is that it's a consolidated view every single time, that I can bring to the board and or to the executive team. Our CEO and our CFO are very much involved in the plays, but the strategy of how we go to market is delivered by me, across the whole organization.
And I really love that, because when you think about when you have leaders from different departments, everybody has their own self-interest. They have their own people, they have their own teams, they have their own measures of what makes them and their teams look good. And that can, and most often does, create competing priorities.
Yeah.
But you can't compete with yourself. It really is best decision.
Yeah, I think the other part of it is that it allows for a different level of transparency across my team too, right? So for OKRs, for example, each team has their own OKRs, but the whole team sees it across the whole customer journey, and all knows how we're all going to be successful. And so when some teams are behind, the other teams who may be ahead can actually lean in and help us be more successful organizationally, rather than in that individual department. And that is for the betterment of the company and our customers. In the long run, it's not us versus them. It's we all pulling in the same direction at the same time together.
Yeah, and what we call that is the domino effect. Because we've, how you line up the goals so that every department's goals are within line of one another, so that we can all, be successful. Because I think every marketer has, at least if you've been around for a while, you can think back to when marketing was popping champagne and, patting ourselves on the back, but the revenue numbers were in the toilet. And it's like, well, we did our part, and like sales is getting laid off and there's all these other things happening. And it's, that disconnect. Whereas you're right, when everybody has visibility, the OKRs are all aligned, it's not, we're not rowing in a circle, like we're all rowing in the same direction.
Yeah. And I think the other part of it for me is that, marketing typically gets asked to generate top of pipe, if you will, right? And for me, it's also looking at that net retention revenue that marketing needs to lean into, as does sales when revenue is at risk, or when revenue opportunities from those existing customers through expansion or upsell are available. And yet we don't talk about that very much, because the play of customer marketing is such a it's buried in the marketing team very often, but it's probably one of the most critical from a growth opportunity. The validation of customer stories, and the work to keep that going in the pipeline, it is really critical. And I think that's a missed opportunity for most marketers, is they're not really thinking about how does the customer experience enable those customer stories, so that we get those moments of advocacy that drive pipe. And we don't get credit for that really in the long run, right? Because it's mostly measured at top of pipe, depending on what your attribution model is.
Right. And so are there any things that you're doing with your various teams to help foster that collaboration and that, thought process that really is focused on the customer experience and the journey, and not just on, the typical, vanity metrics that all departments have?
Yeah. Look, I walked in and the first thing I asked for was the customer journey post signature. And I believe that that is the beginning of a relationship with a customer, not when the sale process is happening. There is some trust built, obviously, to the point that you want people to sign off, and there are various buyers in that process. But in order to maintain the status quo, as I talked about earlier, for renewal, you have to make sure that the touch points along the journey are documented and you're optimizing for organic interactions. And so that is one playbook. That is the first playbook that I actually built, with the team at Path Factory, was the customer experience to stop some of the churn that we had. And it's things for, like, as soon as a contract is signed, it sounds cheesy, but there's an automated email out of marketing automation from the CEO saying, "Welcome to Path Factory." It's a minor play, but it still makes it credible that they are important enough to the CEO, that we recognize that, right? And it's a thank you for your business. And everybody likes to be thanked for their business. It's just a minor play. And it's so easy to enact if you have the right rev tech stack and you have a rev ops person who understands how to code that, right? And then the MOPS person working with that rev ops person as well. But for me, it's about what are the inflection points across the customer journey that I can either automate, that I can build plays against, that will protect the revenue so that we can grow. Leaky bucket is the worst problem. And I think most people right now are probably saying, I got to retain. You got to look at your customer journey map right now, and you got to figure out whether you have the right plays in place for your customers.
No, that is definitely sound advice. And I think right now, where we are seeing budgets getting cut and, headcount and all these sorts of things, but the revenue goals are not changing. And so that is one place. It's almost like you can grow just by keeping stuff from falling out of the bucket.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and if you are a SaaS company, it's one of the first metrics that investors want to learn about, right? Is that there's an expectation that you will have net retention above 100% if you're in an enterprise sales motion, and that you better be making sure that that's increasing quarter over quarter and not dropping below that 100%, because depending what your motions are, but that would be one where you have to protect what you have. Otherwise, it's really hard to grow top line.
Yeah. And I mean, you think about, all the statistics show it's so much harder to get a customer. There's, more the cost of acquisition and, all these sorts of things. And then it's almost like a lot of companies just let that drop. It's like you did all that work to get them to say yes, and then you don't put in that same work to get them to stay.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is that you ask permission for expansion, right? If you have good customer experiences and you have people who believe in you, then you can do that. But I think, we want to talk about revenue in terms of the full life cycle. it's also making sure that people really understand the use cases of your product or your solution. And so, you better be enabling them and your own team, if they're using your product, to understand the full use case possibilities and what the underlying strategies and tactics of those use cases might be as well.
Yeah, and I've seen that, we're a service company and a lot of our clients are product companies. And I've seen that on both sides, places where I look and I'm like, well, why do you have this tech when you have this? And they're like, oh, we didn't know that one did that. So we went out and bought this thing. Or, times where, as a service company, we've seen clients bring in another vendor and, I'm like, oh, are you guys not happy? And they're like, no, you guys are amazing. And I'm like, well, why'd you bring in somebody else to do this? And they're like, we didn't know you did that thing. So that is a good point in making sure your team understands all of the use cases so that then trickles out for your customers.
Yeah. I hear a lot from, and in true transparency, we've hired Christine P. from Forrester. And so she was a keynote speaker at Forrester Summit. But we hear about the fact that I hear a lot of people in the world talk about sales and marketing alignment. But to me, it's even further than sales and marketing alignment. It has to be a contiguous experience for that customer. And so if your salespeople are sending stories out in that 17% of the buying experience, and marketing has warmed them up with 83%, right? And it's a different story. That's not a really great experience. Take that to when they start to work with your CX team and the story is not contiguous again, that really exacerbates the dissatisfaction. And so, I look at it from end to end in terms of what are the stories we're telling in our messaging and positioning, whether that's a CX piece or whether that's a release note or whether that's top of funnel, thought leadership pieces that we're creating as well.
Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit. There are a lot of naysayers that say your role can't be done the way that you do it. And obviously you are living proof, but I have had lots of marketing leaders who have said, a marketing leader can't lead sales, that, someone that doesn't come from, product or success, they can't, like one person can't own all of these things. Your background's not that varied. What do you say to that? Why, is it just you? Are you the unicorn that allows it to happen? Or,
at the end of the day, I'm passionate about customers. And if you bring that to work every day and you understand how to read a balance sheet, you can do any job. And that to me is the key, is that I have worked in sales and I have worked in CX and I've worked in marketing. Tying them all together is I am focused on the customer first, and having the right people in the right seats. Stephen, what's his name? Good to Great, Jim Collins, having the right people in the right seat on the right bus. Make sure that you have the people underneath you that can do the special tasks or strategies underneath each of those roles. But holistically, having that vision and the ability to connect the dots and be curious and just deep enough, it is key. I think, there are lots of people who are specialists in whatever they're in, right? So you're a DG person, you're an ABM person. Explore and become a generalist on other things, right? And I think when you're in large organizations, that tends to happen at the enterprise level, is that you are a specialist in whatever you're in. But in small co, you have a chance to step up and try new things. And so if you are in a position where you're doing your job well, you should be asking for special projects. You should be curious and ask the people above you or beside you, can I walk in your shoes for a day? Because there's nothing more than learning about the job that you may or may not love, right? And to me, you have to be passionate about when you go to work. I know you are, Brandi. You and I have had many a conversation about, what is career and how do you grow? And, we've been at various events together, and at the end of the day, the common link for people who grow in their careers is that they are passionate, they're curious, they take a chance on themselves, and they ask permission to take on special projects. And that's how you learn. And so if you are interested in this role, it's possible. It takes a lot of work, believe me. But it's one of the most satisfying to me, because one of my personal mantras is that I want to create resume making moments for people. In terms of, because everybody needs a break and everybody wants something to celebrate in their resumes. And right now I'm helping some people write resumes and, giving them encouragement. But for me, it's about also pointing out those resume making moments and showing people the opportunity to get those resume making moments as part of my job. And in my leadership team's job is to make them aware of, that's a resume making moment for the person that's reporting to you. Here's how you might approach it. But again, it's curiosity. It's asking good questions. It's, making sure that you're taking care of yourself and your team in the process as well.
Okay. And so I know that you have worked in sales before, and I think the biggest argument, so sort of taking the naysayers to a different level, is that, yeah, marketing can lean in these other places if they've never worked in that function. Do you feel like someone who has not actually worked in sales can lead a sales team?
Yes. If you are not afraid of carrying the bag. That is the caveat that is the mental block in most people's minds. So when I was approached in the last company to take on the title was Chief Customer Officer. I had all 3 teams. My title now is COO. It could be CRO, could be CXO. I really don't care. It was just like, what is the title, right? But the key was in that position was like, you're taking over sales and we're turning this company around. I was like, oh God, like, like, oh my God, what am I doing? Right. But it was a mental barrier of, okay, I'm prepared to take the risk of the bag. And most marketers carry a bag, but don't really say that they carry a bag. Right. And now that people are talking about influenced pipeline or pipeline contribution, as opposed to MQLs or SQAs or whatever you want to call them. Right. But I think it's a mental mindset and shift for a lot of people that there is money that makes you more exposed because the whole company understands what revenue is, as opposed to some of the mythical, legendary marketing metrics that you could bluff to the rest of the company if you don't have somebody who understands them.
Yeah, because MQLs are kind of like statistics. Whatever number you set, you can make it happen. Somebody
Change
with
your
a
lead
poll.
scoring.
Yeah. It's like simple tweak to your lead scoring and voila, we got more leads.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's one thing I think has been one of the biggest shifts in marketing over the years, has been the fact that marketing now at least has a direct connection to the bag. Most won't claim to own any part of it, but it at least is a direct tie.
Yeah. And so part of my lead to revenue dashboards is that revenue contribution and pipeline contribution is actually split in campaigns. And most people in marketing would think marketing campaigns, but that was the way that we had to do it in Salesforce, is that what pipeline has been generated by marketing, what pipeline has been generated by BDRs, and what pipeline's been generated by AEs, so that I can see whether AEs are carrying their weight in that contribution as well. And so, looking at it holistically allows me that flexibility to say, pump up marketing, pump up the AEs, pump up the BDRs, whatever it is in the process. But owning the number is really hard. Building the bottom up model is challenging, but it's really rewarding when you make those numbers for the company. And you get to give people their bonuses and hire new people and things like that as well.
Yeah, it's always a good feeling when you make something hard happen. And so the last sort of area that I want to talk about is, I know that there's a lot of, heads of marketing that will listen to this and think, this sounds amazing, but, and there's always a but, I only own marketing. I'm generally happy at my company. what can I do to help to unsilo our organization, remove the friction from our customer experience, and really get us all on the same page? So, any advice for those people who want to accomplish what you've accomplished, but don't have they don't have the same scope. Like they're more, they
Yeah.
exist in silos today, and they don't have the control.
Yeah, I think it's about asking for special projects when there's an opportunity, if you've got the capacity and you're doing things that you should be doing. But I also think that it's about really becoming customer centric. And I'm going to say that again and again and again. Everybody on my leadership team has an OKR to listen to 5 gong calls a week. The voice of the customer needs to be infused in the work that they do. And if you don't bring that to work every day, then you don't represent the customer. And so if you are in marketing and you are not listening to calls or attending customer meetings or arranging for fireside chats with your customers to your marketing team, you're missing out. And so the opportunity is that you need to become much more customer centric rather than marketing programmatic centric, because customers, at the end of the day, the company owns the customer. The account executive and the CSM doesn't own them. And I say that to my team all the time. The company owns the customer pays the company, and the company pays the employee. So the customer is owned by the company. And so everybody on the team better know who that customer is.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah, I'm sitting here listening and I'm like, okay, I gotta get, I gotta get my marketing managers listening to some of our customer calls. Because that, is like, they're all, and I think we all fall into that trap. Everybody's like, go, go, go on all the things that need to get done. But to your point, it really does, help with the messaging, help with, just making sure that everybody is thinking about that customer experience.
I think the other thing is that making sure that everybody knows that the importance of customer marketing in the story of building the brand, and the pipeline and the revenue, right? And so we have a Slack bot that as soon as somebody posts something about a customer saying something nice about us in LinkedIn or whatever, we're capturing that so that the customer marketing team can go and chase that person for an active advocacy directly for us. We also have things from marketing that are organic to things like NPS. We know that when somebody gives us a positive, we need to be talking to them about maybe doing a review, because we know the importance of reviews in things like Trust Radius and G2 and peer reviews, which if you use those are things that are used to find the company and build the momentum of the pipeline. And so you have to show the company that you're doing more than just demand generation, that you're actually thinking about the customer experience more broadly. And so that's why I start with the customer experience map from a marketer's perspective, but also what are the plays that I need to put in from a CX perspective to retain that revenue on an ongoing basis as well.
Awesome. Well, talking about our challenges is just first step, and nothing changes if nothing changes. So in traditional therapy, the therapist gives the client some homework, but here at Revenue Rehab, we like to flip that on its head and ask you to give us some homework. So if you can summarize for us, what are your key takeaways, and what is that one thing that you want our listeners to do coming out of this conversation?
The customer. Like I can't say it enough. Customers beget more customers. And so if you are in marketing, you need to understand what's happening in CX. If you're in sales, you need to be a good partner in the transition to CX. And the story between those workflows and processes and data. Your RevOps person is the person who can make that magic happen and make it such that the customer doesn't have to repeat themselves over and over and over again.
Awesome. So what's our action item? What's our one thing?
Your action item is to go and find a special project to expand your understanding of other people's roles and responsibilities. Go and find a project and go and listen to some gong calls. There might be somebody needs help with something on a customer call if you're in marketing or sales or whatever. But identify an opportunity for yourself to expand yourself and your learning, right? And then maybe even one extra step I'd say is identify a resume making moment for somebody else and lift them up because somebody has lifted you up along the way as well.
I love both of those. So we're going to have an undercover boss kind of moment where we're going to go and do another role, find a special project that gets us involved in a department we're not always. And then no matter what role you're in, I do think helping to lean into someone else to give them a resume making moment. And I so love that term is, it's always a good thing to do as a leader. Because you're right. Like, there are so many people who have helped me along the way, and being able to give back helps them. It makes you feel good. So that is amazing. Helen, I have so enjoyed our discussion today, but that's our time for today.
I loved it. It was so good. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me. I'm so glad we were able to have this conversation. And for anyone listening that has not already listened to episode 22, it pairs very nicely in talking about that post-sales experience and making sure that you have a great customer journey and even into mapping that out. Thanks to everyone else for joining us today. I hope you have enjoyed my conversation with Helen. I can't believe it's the end already. I will see you next time.
You've been listening to Revenue Rehab with your host, Brandi Starr. Your session is now over, but the learning has just begun. Join our mailing list and catch up on all our shows at revenuerehab.live. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Revenue Rehab. This concludes this week's session. We'll see you next week.